morning, everyone. I'm Meredith Ann Cousin, the lead pastor here at The Well. Welcome if it's your first time here. We have some Connect cards around. You'll see in the chairs, and we'd love for you to fill one of those out, bring it to our welcome area, and we've got a really cool gift to give you, and you can let us know how to pray for you. If you are watching us online or on the app, you can fill out our digital Connect card and let us know how we can be praying for you. And if you're here in person and you attend regularly, you can go ahead and fill out the digital Connect card on our app as well, and let us know if there's ways that we can be praying, if you've got questions, things like that. So we are in our fourth week of our series of Joseph, and when my daughter Imogen was in first grade, she was about 6, and she's an incredibly imaginative child. She created an entire world of superheroes for her and her friends, and they called it Death Danger, and she created like characters for each one of them, and they had special powers and special names. She loved it so much that she even had her birthday party themed Death Danger, which was pretty tough because we're like, wait, what? This isn't a thing that's outside of your imagination, so we need to figure out what it is to get it themed this way. But she, like her friends, they played a whole game. And when I asked her, Imogen, what is your superpower? She says, oh, Mom, well, I'm the leader, so I have all the powers. And I was like, you have all the powers? She said, yeah, because the leader has to be the best, and so I have all the powers. And I tried to explain to her, well, you know, leadership's a little bit different than that. Like, leadership isn't that you have all the powers. Leadership is that, like, you try to bring out the powers in other people, and that you try to make the best out of them, not just to be the best. It was lost on a 6-year-old, you know? Mm-hmm. And she didn't quite get that. She just thought I was lame and not getting her game. But the reality is there's a lot of adults who have still picked up the same messages that somewhere Imogen picked up about leadership. That leadership means you have all the super leadership powers, right? You're the best in the room, and if you're not the best, then you have to perform the best, right? You might not feel like you're the best, but you have to look like you're the best. And so when it comes to leadership, as Christians, people can feel conflicted about it, because they can feel like, well, you know, I'm not supposed to want to be better than everybody else. We're told not to consider yourself better than others, you know, to humbly serve other people. And so, you know, we don't quite know what to do if we want leadership. We think, oh, I should shy away from that. Or if someone says they want to be a leader, we're kind of suspicious of that. Like, why would you want it? That's not right. I don't think that you're supposed to say that if you're a follower of Jesus. And so leadership can feel weird, and we don't quite know what to do with it. But leadership doesn't have to be synonymous with arrogance and thinking that you're the best or being superior to others. And Joseph today, in this part of his story, shows us what it looks like to lead with humility. So let's pick back up to where Joseph is. Last week we left Joseph at the lowest point of his story. He was in prison. He had, you know, encountered the cupbearer. He thought, yes, I'm going to get out of here. He interpreted the dreams, and then the cupbearer forgot him. And we said it was the turning point where nothing happened yet. But today, it's a turning point where everything happens very, very fast. And so, picking back up with Joseph, when 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile when out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed along among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. And Pharaoh woke up. He fell asleep and had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream. And so Pharaoh wakes up and he's like freaked out because he's had these 2 dreams. And remember, last week we talked about, for Egyptians, they believe there's the other world where the gods reside. And when you have a dream, that's a message from the God. You've crossed over into the other world. And for Pharaoh, this is especially true because Pharaoh was considered divine. So Pharaoh's dreams are like super, super important, extra divine, because he also is a god. And so what does Pharaoh do? He's freaked out. He's had these 2 dreams. He calls every magician and wise man together that he can find. And this is Pharaoh, most important person in the whole nation. He has access to them. They all come running, and they all try. And remember, last week we talked about how Egyptians believe that you need to have a special person to interpret your dream. There's a special book, and they have to consult the book. And so all these people are doing all the things that they're supposed to do, and none of them can interpret Pharaoh's dream. And so you've got all the power and wisdom combined in Egypt, and it falls flat. And then the cupbearer remembers. He remembers 2 years ago he encountered someone when he was in prison. And he brings this up to Pharaoh, and this is like pretty risky for the cupbearer because he has to be like, hey, remember the time you threw me in jail because you were so mad at me? Like, not the thing that he really wants to bring to his mind, but he says, remember that time? Well, when we were there, I also had a dream, and the baker had a dream, and this guy, he interpreted them, he was right. And so maybe he can help. And so we're told, so Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And the action here in the Hebrew is very, very fast. Like, it's all very abrupt. Joseph is abruptly taken out of prison. He's shaved in the fashion of an Egyptian, right? Because a Hebrew man would keep a beard. He's shaved, he's changed, and he's brought before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says, you should be able to interpret my dream, right? But Joseph, he goes, I cannot do it. He replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. And Joseph is incredibly adamant here. He says, no, it's like he's going, no, not me. I can't do it. And at first you think Pharaoh's like, what? He says, but God will give you the answer. So Pharaoh tells him his 2 dreams. He adds a few details in there. We won't repeat them. And they're the same 2 dreams. He tells them, and then this is what Joseph says to him. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one and the same dream. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt. But 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, because the famine that follows will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. So God has let Pharaoh in on what's about to happen. Now notice, it's not a judgment. God hasn't said, Pharaoh's really screwed up, so I'm going to give you 7 years of famine starting right now. He says, this is what's about to happen. And the reality is that in the history of Egypt, there are long years of famine that are documented throughout the history of Egypt because Egypt was so dependent on the Nile. And with the Nile, because Egypt doesn't have a lot of rain, every year the Nile would overflow during flood season, and it would bring all these nutrients into the soil, and it was dependent on that every year for the Nile to flood. Now, Pharaoh hearing that something's going to fail is really bad news for him, because as we said, Pharaoh's considered a god, right? He's divine, and one of Pharaoh's divine responsibilities is to make sure that the land goes well for everybody, to keep track of the Nile. That was part of his divine responsibility. So if the Nile starts to fail, that's going to reflect very poorly on Pharaoh. So this is not sounding good for Pharaoh, all this news. And so, he's going to be judged by that. But then Joseph does something amazing, right? So Joseph's shown him what God's about to do, told him, there's 7 great years coming, and then there's 7 very poor years coming. So Pharaoh's gotten some bad news. And then Joseph goes on to give him advice. And this is what Joseph says to Pharaoh. And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. And so Joseph advises him to find a wise and discerning man, and those words there mean someone who can discern between things, who is perceptive, who is skillful, who can lead others, who has a great administrative mind, someone who can see a problem and figure out how to solve it and train other people how to solve it. All under the authority of Pharaoh, but that's what needs to happen. He can quickly see that if we start storing up grain now, then we might be able to make it through the famine. Okay? And Pharaoh hears this plan and he thinks, great idea. That's awesome. And so Pharaoh turns to all of his advisors and he says, can we find anyone like this man in whom is the Spirit of God? And it's probably more the spirit of the gods, right? Because it's not like Pharaoh converted suddenly and believes in Joseph's God, but the spirit of the gods. And then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and people shouted before him, make way! Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, but without your word, no one will lift a hand or foot in all of Egypt. Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphenath-Paneah and gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, to be his wife. And Joseph went through the land of Egypt. And so Pharaoh, in a blink of an eye, makes him second in command. And we have records of ceremonies like these throughout Egypt, where someone who was put in command would be given a signet ring, which signifies power. To be given a gold chain is a reward for a job well done. And this parade that Joseph gets to show how important he is. So he's gone from being in prison to being at the height of power. He's gone from being robed as one who is a prisoner to now robed as Egyptian nobility. He's given a new name, and that name, most scholars think it means God speaks and lives. God speaks and lives. They're not quite sure, but that's what most people think it means. And he's given a wife, and this wife is from one of the highest noble families around, right? And her father is the head of the temple of the sun god, right? And so she's important. The line of Pharaoh would often take wives from this same nobility line. So Joseph is made like the highest of the high when it comes to being Egyptian nobility. And so he's raised up to the pinnacle of power, and then he goes about and he starts his plan. And he starts collecting grain from all the areas, and it says he collects so much that they can't even count it at some point. And then the famine hits. Just like they said, 7 years of abundance, and then the famine hits, and people are starting to get hungry, and they come to Pharaoh, and they're complaining to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says this, the 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food. Then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, go to Joseph and do what he tells you. When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. And all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe everywhere. And so we see that Joseph has enormous power in Egypt. When things go bad, Pharaoh says, go to Joseph and do what he tells you. When he said, people aren't going to lift a hand or a foot around here unless they ask you, he meant it. Right? Joseph's in charge. He is at the height of his power. And you notice that he doesn't shy away from it, right? He doesn't say, no, not me, not me. He steps right into it. He's got this big plan, steps right into it, and he puts it into action. And it is at this point in the story where faithfulness is harder than ever. Because it's one thing to be faithful and to rely on God when you're in prison. And there's nothing else, right? There's nowhere to go but up when you're there. It's much harder when you are at the height, when you are on the mountaintop. It is so much easier to just kind of slip away from your faith when everything's going well, right? Like when everything's just easy and smooth. And in this moment, we can imagine the temptation for Joseph, right? He has been at the bottom of the barrel. He knows how bad it is to be in the lowest position of society. He doesn't want to go back there. And so it would be really easy as he starts to assimilate into Egyptian culture to just kind of go into complacency or to shift his loyalty to Pharaoh, the most powerful person in the world at that time, right? To shift his loyalty to say, this is the person who rescued me. Or shift his priority to say, my priority is self-preservation. I'm not going back down. And so I'm going to make sure that things go my way. And that's the challenge with power, right? Because with power, we can begin to slip into looking out for myself, looking out for me above anyone else. I don't know what that is, but there's some sort of voice thing going on around here. So if it's yours, you might want to stop it. Oh, thanks. So it's a challenge of power, right? Because it starts to be like, well, I gotta look out for me, right? And I gotta do what I need to do to stay ahead of everyone else. And we're told to be on the lookout for that for ourselves, because when we start to do that, that's what the Bible refers to as selfish ambition. Selfish ambition. And this is what Paul says about selfish ambition. He says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of the others. And James, who is Jesus' brother, he says this, but if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth, since such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. And so this term, selfish ambition, is a political term in the Greek, and it means to be factious. It means to be someone who causes rivalries, who creates in-groups and out-groups, who creates tension and causes strife. And it's self-seeking. It's to promote your own self-interest at the expense of others. It's making enemies. It's wanting to be better than the people around you. It's exactly what so many of us have seen worldly leadership be, right? Worldly leadership can be defined as, it's a dog-eat-dog world, and whoever's on top, you gotta stay on top, you do what it is to get ahead, right? And that's often what leadership looks like. It's raising yourself above others, it's seeking to be the most powerful person in the room, and selfish ambition leads to pride. It leads to pride, and that's what most of us are so afraid of. And Joyce Myers, I love how she talks about pride. She says, pride is an independent, me-oriented spirit. It makes people arrogant, rude, and hard to get along with. When our hearts are prideful, we don't give God the credit, and we mistreat people, looking down on them and thinking we deserve what we have. Right? And that's the spirit that we don't want to have. We're told, do nothing out of selfish ambition. As a follower of Jesus, do nothing out of selfish ambition. Not some things. Nothing, right? Consider others better than yourself. Put others' needs ahead of you. And so again, we get conflicted when it comes to leadership, but here's the thing. Leadership does not have to be synonymous with selfish ambition. Leadership does not have to be synonymous with self-seeking and self-serving behavior. Jesus calls us to servant leadership. He calls us to servant leadership, where we care for others, where we use our leadership for the benefit of others. And at the heart of servant leadership is humility. And here's 3 things that I think are essential to leading in a way that is humble. The first one is to have a right opinion. The second one is to learn wherever you are. And the third is to live out holy ambition. So have a right opinion, learn wherever you are, and live out holy ambition. And while Joseph, in the beginning of our story, 13 years ago, did not have these 3 things, right? Like when he was given the position of authority and privilege by his father, he flaunted it, and he was self-serving, and he was inconsiderate and selfish. But we're going to see that over these 13 years, and he had to learn through the school of hard knocks, Joseph has gained humility. Joseph leads with humility. So let's break these down. The first one is to have a right opinion. And here's the thing about humility. It is not about having a low opinion about yourself. So often we think we don't have a high opinion of ourselves, too high of an opinion. That sometimes we have too low of opinion of ourselves, and we name that humility. But David Wilkerson says, a humble person is not one who thinks little of himself, hangs his head and says, I'm nothing. Rather, he is one who depends wholly on the Lord for everything in every circumstance. So humility is to have a right opinion of yourself. Not too high, not too low. And we see this with Joseph, right? Because when Joseph is brought before Pharaoh, put yourself in his shoes, right? He's just been in prison. Here's his shot. He had a shot 2 years ago. It didn't work out for him. So you better believe he could be tempted to be like, okay, I'm in front of the most powerful man in the world, and he's saying, you can interpret my dream. And you could bet he's probably tempted to be like, yep, I can show off, I can look really important, I can get myself out of prison, I can endear myself to Pharaoh. But notice that he doesn't do that. He is the same person in prison as he is in the palace, right? In prison, he says to the two men, not me, all interpretations belong to God, right? And in front of Pharaoh, same thing, not me, all interpretations belong to God. And so he doesn't have too high of an opinion of himself, but also he doesn't have too low an opinion of himself, because when Pharaoh, after he gives his plan, when Pharaoh comes to him and says, there's no one else who's wiser or more discerning than you. You're the person to do this work. He doesn't go, not me. No, just God, not me. I'm nothing, right? He doesn't have such a low opinion of himself that he doesn't step into the role. He steps into the role. And so humility is having a right opinion of yourself, where you acknowledge that your gifts, your experience, all of that comes from God. Your very life comes from God. But God also wants you to bring all of your skills to the table to partner with him. That's what Joseph shows us. He has a right opinion of himself. And then we think the next step is to learn wherever you are. To learn wherever you are. And Joseph is given this huge role, to run all of Egypt. But Joseph has been prepared for this role. How? By running Potiphar's household as a slave, by running the prison as a prisoner. Not the two roles that he would have chosen for himself. Right? Those are not roles that he thought, I'd like to be head prisoner, of all the prisoners. That's not where he'd want to learn all the skills, but he learned where he was. Right where he was, he did the role that was in front of him. And younger people in this room, I'm talking like 30 and younger. Some of you who are over 30 probably need to hear this too, but 30 and younger, I see often you struggle with this. Right? Because I'm so grateful that our society has moved to embrace younger voices. It's important that we see that people who are younger have something to bring to the table, but often younger people feel like, I'm here, so I deserve a seat at the table because I exist. Like I should be at the table. And you think, well, there's something for experience. There's something to be spoken for of experience. And so sometimes we get so focused on the role, right? I need to have this role or this title in order to be important, and we can feel like we're being stunted. And we don't learn right where we are, right? And so we think, I need the corner office, so everything is just a stepping stone to that, rather than this is the role that's in front of me, and I'm going to do the work that's in front of me and learn exactly where I am. And it's tough. When you can feel undervalued in that place. But learning right where you are, there's learning available to you right now. And so sometimes we get so focused on a role or a seat at the table that we don't learn what's in front of us. But we see that Joseph, part of humility was learning right where he is. And right where you are, there are lessons for you to learn. There are skills for you to gain. And you might not be in the seat that you want to be in, but there's still something valuable right where you are. And Barbara Brown Taylor says this of meaningful work, and I love this. She says, whatever I decided to do for a living, it was not what I did, but how I did it that mattered. God had suggested an overall purpose, but was not going to supply the particulars for me. If I wanted a life of meaning, then I was going to have to apply the purpose for myself. And here's the thing. More often than not, God is concerned about doing something in you than through you, right? God will do something through you, absolutely, and it's great for us to want to have God to do something through us, but God wants to do something in you more than anything. And so if you want your work to be meaningful, it's not a role or a title or a seat that makes your work meaningful. It's really if you make your work meaningful. If you do your work as if you are doing it for the Lord and learn everything that you have, and it doesn't mean you're going to be stuck there forever, but all of us can learn right where we are. That's part of humility. And then the third one is to live out holy ambition. And when we hear the word ambition, again, we can get like, I don't know if I'm supposed to be ambitious, right? Because we think selfish ambition. But ambition doesn't have to be selfish ambition, right? You have ambition. Every person has ambition because we're made in the image of God. Clay Scroggins has a great book called How to Lead When You're Not in Charge. And he talks about, he has a great chapter in there on ambition. He says, he defines ambition this way. He says, ambition is the strong desire we have to make something or to achieve something, or even when it takes great effort, focus, and determination, right? So it's, you want to make something, you want to achieve something, you want to contribute to the world. You have a drive in you because you're made in the image of a creator. You want to partner with God. You want to make the world better. Here at The Well, we often talk about making your highest contribution. You want to make your highest contribution to the world. And it's the difference between trying to do something with your life versus making something of your life, right? Making something of your life is more about, I want to be important. Doing something with your life is what each of us is called to do. You've been given a life, and God wants you to do something with it. God wants you to partner with him. And so again, Clay Scroggins says this: you have ambition because you were created with the drive to create, contribute, and influence things around you. And we want to make an impact on the world. But when we don't know what to do with our ambition, there's two ways that it gets distorted. Clay Scroggins talks about these two ways. The first one is we kill it. We kill our ambition. And we kill it by thinking it's unsafe, it's gonna stunt my spiritual growth, it's gonna make me selfish, it's gonna, I'm gonna seek prominence and grab power and grow in pride, and so I just need to get rid of it or stuff it down, and so sometimes you don't seek leadership out, or you sit back passively and think, well, if God wants me to be in leadership, then he'll just hand it to me. Like, it'll just all fall into place, and I don't have to do anything. That's how I'll know, because it'll just, I'll be forced into it, right? So we can kill our ambition, or the other way that it gets distorted is we let it run wild, right? And that means, we pursue our ambition uncritically. We think, if I want it, it's probably good, right? I should go for it, I should do that. And where this can show up is, sometimes you just are ruthless to get whatever role you want, but sometimes it's that feeling like I deserve to be there, and so we get very critical of others, right? We sit back and we think, well, they're not doing it right, or we circumvent authority, and we start to work around the system because we want to make ourselves look better and get ahead, so you can let your ambition into the driver's seat of your own life, right? And it just starts running the show, and so you believe that you need to be in charge and do what needs to be done to get there, and you want to lead without constraints, right? There's so many people who want to, you figure, I'll get to this seat, and no one will tell me what to do. I get to be in charge, right? I hate to tell you that does not exist. There's no role like that exists at all. There's no, and if there is, you don't want to be part of that. If someone's leading without any checks and balances at all, that's no good, right? And so again, Clay Scroggins says, the desire to rule or control without restraint is dangerous, but so is the inner passivity of waiting to have authority in order to lead. God doesn't want us to sit back. He wants us to responsibly engage, doing the work he has given us wherever we are, with whatever title or role he has currently assigned to us. And so holy ambition, selfish ambition is all about me, getting ahead, getting the role, getting the title. Holy ambition is acknowledging first that the drive to create and to contribute comes from God, right? That's where it starts, and that I want to partner with God to make things on earth as it is in heaven. That God has a vision for how we should live with one another and treat one another, and I can contribute to that. I can come alongside. God has given me skills and talent and vision, and I get to bring that to the table. And we see that with Joseph, right? Joseph has a holy ambition. When he hears the two dreams that Pharaoh has and he sees what's going on, he doesn't have a small plan. He has an audacious plan, right? Let's go and tax everyone. We're going to tax everyone exceedingly for 7 years while things are abundant. We're going to take their stuff, and we're going to tell them, no, you're going to want to do this for 7 years, because in 7 years there's going to be a famine. You know human nature. It's not different back then than it is now. People aren't good 7-year planners, right? They're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. They're like, wait, you're taking my money, you're taking my food, right? So he has this big, bold plan, and he steps right into it. And the crazy thing about it is Joseph is only thinking about Egypt in that moment. He has no idea that God is going to do something even bigger with his holy ambition. That God is going to fulfill those two dreams that he gave him 13 years ago. And it's going to be over 13 years ago. It's going to be over 20 years ago that he was given those dreams. And God is going to fulfill them not at the expense of his brothers, but at the benefit of his brothers. Right? God is going to bring about restoration and reconciliation and healing. He's going to further the story of Israel. Because remember, we talked about Genesis is origins. It's the origin of the nation of Israel. And so Joseph, stepping into this holy ambition, moves the whole story forward. The world would have been worse off if Joseph had not become the leader that he was. If Joseph had not stepped into the leadership role that was in front of him and brought everything that he had learned along the way, right? But he wasn't that when he started. Humble leadership took time to develop in him. It takes time to develop in us. I know that's been the case for me. So my leadership journey it's been a bumpy one, right? And I've had to learn how to grow in humility. And these three things, putting these three things into practice, of first having a right opinion. And when I first was getting into ministry, I didn't know what to do with this teaching gift that I had. Because I didn't want to be arrogant and think too highly of myself, so I tried to downplay it and kind of stuff it and do that killing of your ambition. I don't want to seek teaching roles because that's trying to put myself in front of others. And eventually I had to step back, and I had enough conviction that, well, it's a gift. I didn't give it to myself. I didn't decide one day I'm going to learn how to teach, and so I'm going to go and practice, and it just comes naturally to me. And so I had to stop and say, well, if God gave me this gift, then maybe God wants me to do something with it. And so it was having not too low of an opinion. But then, after I graduated seminary, I was a young person once too in my career, and I had to work to not have too high of an opinion. Because I had this degree, I had my Master of Divinity, and I got hired at this church, and I thought, yeah, I'm this big deal. I was not this big deal, right? I was not taken very seriously. I was the youngest person on staff. I looked a lot younger than I was. Even I was in my late 20s, but people, one person thought I was a teenager, and I'm married, very strange, but people are weird. So, but I wanted a seat at the table. I had a degree. I knew a lot, but I had a lot to learn. Right? I remember writing my first sermon, and I was working with a mentor, and he read it, and he looked at me and goes, well, you've written a great paper. It's not a sermon, right? And I was so deflated. I don't even know how to write a sermon, right? I had to learn. I had to grow in that, And so, and in those waiting moments, where I was there were some roles where I was twiddling my thumb. When I graduated seminary and got my first job, I spent most of my time putting out tablecloths and folding bulletins. I'm I went to 4 years of grad school for this. What? But during that time, God challenged me and said, well, why are you in ministry? Are you in ministry for you, or are you in ministry for me? Because if you're in ministry for me, then fold the bulletins with all your might. You fold those bulletins if you're folding them for the Lord. And that was really hard to do, right? That was super, super hard. So I had to work to have a right opinion around ministry isn't about me and my reputation, and this teaching gift isn't so that I can look great. It's a gift for other people. And then I had to learn wherever I was, and I've been in ministry for a long time, and I've been in a lot of different leadership structures and a lot of different roles, and I've seen the good and the bad of ministry, right? And often I felt underutilized in a lot of my roles. I started out and I have I have way more experience than this. And God gave me wisdom very early on in my career to pray this prayer in every role that I've been in. God, help me to learn everything you have for me while I am here. Help me to not miss any of the lessons that you want me to learn while I'm in this role. And here's something that I have learned. You can learn just as much from bad leaders as you can from good leaders, right? Larry Osborne talks about the stupid tax, and he says, don't pay the stupid tax if you don't have to, let someone else pay it for you. And I have been very fortunate to see a lot of people pay the stupid tax before I did, right? And I've seen decisions in ministry where I'm I have no authority or ability to change that, but what I can do is I can learn from it, and I can sit back and rather than just judge it and be grouchy about it and think, wow, I'd do it so much better, I'd sit back and say, okay, how did they get there? What are they missing? What would I have done differently? And just a few days ago, as I was putting the sermon together, Steve and I were driving, and I turned to him and I said, now, all these years later, I can look at all these roles and all these contexts that I was in where I was frustrated and felt like I was being held back, there was a lid on my leadership, and I can look and say, I'm so grateful for each one of them, because I wouldn't be the leader that I am without all of those situations, without having to learn the lesson right where I was. And so it's frustrating to learn right where you are when you're not necessarily in the seat that you want to be or in the role that you want to be. But if you miss it, you miss out something that you never know. Joseph wasn't I know, I'm going to run this prison with all my might so I can be the second in command of Egypt one day, right? That wasn't his vision. But that's what happened, right? He was prepared for something that he had no idea was coming. Same for you, same for me, right? And then that idea of having a holy ambition. I am a natural born leader. I joke that I don't work well for other people. I work well with other people, but not for other people. I like to be in charge. I've always liked to be in charge. I have big ideas and big vision. And so, I'm a naturally ambitious person. My husband is not a naturally ambitious person. He's, which is probably good because they were not competitive. But sometimes he's you can just chill out sometimes. You don't have to always be accomplishing something. I've learned that over the years. But I'm naturally ambitious. But over the years, and I'm so grateful that God has held me back from being in a lead role, like the one who's calling the shots, till my 40s. Because over that time, God has moved from a selfish ambition, which is about me and my career and my reputation and what I get to do, to a holy ambition that God has given me such a passion and vision for the church. That I honestly believe, like, some people talk about ministry and they'll say, like, oh, run as far as you can from it if you don't have to do it. And I'm like, no, ministry's awesome. It's the best. If you want to go into ministry, you should go into ministry. It's great. You get to build systems and structures that bring people closer to God, that empower them, that build community. It's the one place, I say it over and over again, you get to come here. You don't even have to be good at anything and we'll still love you, right? You can be crazy and we'll still love you. Like, it's the one place you can be as crazy as you want. No, we're going to help you be a little less crazy, hopefully. But, like, you just get to belong because you're family here, right? And we get to build that. And God has given me over the years this holy ambition that I am more concerned with the health of a community than my own reputation. When I was younger, I'm so conflict avoidant to my core. I don't like conflict, I like harmony. Everyone should get along, don't be weird, don't say mean things. Like, that's just the way I think people should live, but people aren't like that. And people do weird things or they misunderstand each other. And there's conflict, and in my youth, I would avoid it because I'd be too afraid that someone would think less of me or it might ruin a relationship. And now I'm way too protective of the community of God that I'm willing to let someone think a little bit less of me in order to address something that might harm a community. That's a holy ambition that God has given me, to build a community that looks different than anything else, to build a community that's built off the teachings of Jesus, that lives it out, like, for real, for real. So when we talk about Matthew 18, we don't just say it, we do it. So, like, if you come and complain to me about someone, I'm going to say to you, have you talked to that person? Because if you haven't talked to that person, why are you talking to me? Like, that's not the way that we do things around here. That's not how it works, right? And so a holy ambition is something that is so much bigger than you, that is seeing the world the way that God wants the world to be, on earth as it is in heaven. And that has been a long journey for me, and I'm not done. Growing in humility is a lifelong journey. It doesn't stop when you get to whatever role that you think you're going to be in. It keeps going. And the only way to keep it going is to keep God at the center of everything that you do. And that's what we see with Joseph. The reason why Joseph is able to lead with humility the way that he does is because he keeps God at the center. And so we're told, before the years of famine hit, when everything's going great in Egypt, Joseph has 2 sons. And we're told this: before the years of famine came, 2 sons are born to Joseph and by Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, "It is because God has made me forget all my troubles and my father's household." And the second son he named Ephraim, and he said, "It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." And so these names are incredibly telling because, first, they are Hebrew names, right? Joseph looks like an Egyptian. He's been given an Egyptian name. He has an Egyptian wife. He is the head, he's the head of Egypt, right? Other than Pharaoh, he is Egyptian. But Joseph has held on to the language of his homeland, the language of his God. They are Hebrew names. And the first one is Manasseh, and it means to forget. But the irony is, if you name someone Forget, you will always remember, right? Like if I say, I'm going to forget that I stubbed my toe last week, so I name this Forget, you will always remember that you stubbed your toe last week, right? So it's not that he has forgotten and that he's like, can't remember, where am I from? It's that he has chosen to allow God to change the way he remembers. That God has changed what that story is. And so I have forgotten the way I used to see that story. And now I remember with the way that God is inviting me to see that story. And then his second son's name is Ephraim, which is to be fruitful. And notice what he says. He doesn't say, God has made me fruitful by removing me from the land of my suffering, by the land of my affliction. He says, God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering, in the land of my affliction. And Joseph has allowed God to reframe his story. And that is how Joseph leads with humility. That Pharaoh isn't his deliverer, God is his deliverer. Pharaoh isn't the one who got him out of prison, God is the one. Pharaoh isn't his comforter, God is his comforter, right? Even in the land of his affliction. Because he's so firmly grounded in his faith, he's learned to have a right opinion of himself. and he's learned wherever he is, whatever role he's been in, and he's held on to this holy ambition. And here's the thing. The world is desperate for leaders who lead with humility. They are desperate for it. There are so many leaders out there who lead with selfish ambition. Right? There's so many people who are just trying to get ahead, and it's a me first attitude. But those who lead in the way of Jesus, the world is desperate for your leadership. They're desperate for you to step into the role that God has for you. Right? Because with Jesus, his leadership isn't about you, it's to serve others. It's to reveal God's goodness and mercy in the world. It's to live out and embody the good news. And so maybe you've struggled with your own leadership. Maybe you've never called yourself a leader because you've allowed the world to define leadership for you. And you think, well, leaders are jerks, right? Leaders are selfish. And I'm not a leader, I'm just a servant. You think, well, no, put those together. Servant leader. Called to be a servant leader. Or maybe you're struggling because you are so fixated on where you want to be, on the role you want to be in, on the chair that you want to sit in, that you just see every role that's not there as a waste of time, right? And it's all a stepping stone. Or maybe you have too low an opinion of yourself, or you think, I'm not a leader because I'm just a fill in the blank. And those of you who are stay-at-home parents, so many of you say, I'm not a leader because I'm just a stay-at-home parent. But think about all the skills that you are gaining as a stay-at-home parent. You are more organized and know how to do conflict management better than most of us, right? Like, that's your whole day. Figure out keeping a schedule, learn how to negotiate with someone who is not always rational, right? And doesn't have reasonable expectations. And you are gaining all sorts of skills. You are leading, right? Where you can lead right where you are, whether you are at the top of the food chain or the bottom, whether you are a slave, a prisoner, or the second in command in Egypt, you can lead right where you are, right? Because the world would have been worse off without Joseph and his leadership. And here's the thing, the world is not better off without your leadership. The world is not better off without your leadership. You have something to contribute. And so leadership is acknowledging that everything we have is a gift from God. Everything that you have, every skill that you have, every passion that you have, your vision can all be a gift from God. But God wants you to bring it to the table and work with him to make the world a better place. And if you don't know how to do that, we're here to help you do that. We're here to help you learn how to do that here and in the world. That's part of our call as Jesus followers, is to make a difference in the world. Not to make something of your life, but to do something with your life. Let's pray.